welcome to the very first episode of the Architecture of Rural Living.
This podcast is all about what it really takes to create a rural home in the countryside, and we thought there was no better place to start than with planning permission.
I'm Rebecca Baxter, Managing Director at Studio 11 Architecture.
And I'm Chris Baxter, Creative Director and Founder. We run an architectural practice that specialises in rural homes, and planning permission is one of the biggest questions we get asked.
In this first episode, we're talking about the different routes to achieving planning permission.
We'll look at some of the more traditional approaches as well as some alternative routes that people may not realise are available to them.
We'll also talk through some of the common misconceptions that we see to help you to start to understand the best routes for your project. So Chris, you and I know that building a home in the countryside and achieving planning permission is quite the journey. But what do we actually mean by rural home? We're not talking homes in villages or within settlement boundaries, really, are we?
No, we're not. So we're really talking about very rural locations, sometimes isolated, sometimes not. And I think we'll look at the definition of isolated in a different episode. And we're really looking at both a mix of existing buildings and new buildings.
Okay, so where should we start with this one? Should we start with existing buildings? So what do we mean by that?
Existing buildings, there are several routes to achieving planning permission. The government has a general thought process that there are lots of redundant buildings in the countryside that they would like to see brought into a better use. And we see this through redundant farm buildings and the Class Q permitted development rights approach to turning those into dwellings and offices and those sorts of things. But we also see that through national policy and the NPPF, which obviously feeds into local plans and local plan policies for conversions of existing buildings.
So those existing buildings, we're talking about redundant barns that you and I live in the countryside. We live in the depths of Lincolnshire. So driving around, we quite often see redundant barns, and we get quite excited about them because we're quite passionate about our job. But looking around, we would see a redundant barn and we would think that would make a great home. Lots of people already, farmers, people with land with redundant buildings on them, already have them there. They're kind of missing out on an opportunity to have something quite great, really, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true. And I think people very much also look at buildings and think, oh, well, they couldn't be converted into a house. And from our point of view, we see that as a challenge. Mm-hmm. We have done multiple different types of agricultural buildings. It doesn't have to be a traditional brick-built barn with a slate roof, that sort of thing. There are multitudes of different types of agricultural buildings that could be converted. Equally, alongside Class Q, there is usually within most local plans a policy which allows for conversion of existing buildings, and they might not well be farm buildings. They might be old industrial units or land that's previously developed, those sorts of things. And there are normally policies within local plans which are fed from national policy which outline how you could convert those types of buildings.
So name one of the coolest projects you've been involved with when it comes to sort of redundant buildings in the countryside. Maybe a barn, or is there something more exciting that you've worked on?
So a couple come to mind. We've done quite a few what I would call a modern barn conversion. So they are steel framed buildings with cladding, which most people look at and think, oh, well, you can't do anything with that. Quite the opposite. They tend to be very spacious, very light spaces, and because they are framed buildings, you have quite a lot of flexibility in terms of the internal layout and things like that. One of the most fun buildings that we've worked on that's not a farm building was actually an old industrial unit. Is a barreled roof industrial unit that was used for sales of machinery and things like that. And actually it made for some spectacular spaces.
They were apartments, weren't they, as well? They weren't just your necessary home.
It was a mix. So it was a site that ended up being multiple dwellings rather than one singular dwelling.
So that is possible in the countryside. It doesn't have to be one home. It
That's
could be
quite correct.
multiple.
Yeah. So we're not talking about just singular homes here. We're talking about the presumption of that policy allows you to turn into dwellings.
Okay, brilliant. So moving on from conversions, what else can we achieve in the countryside?
So if it's not an existing building, you effectively have to say, okay, well, it must be a new building. And there are a couple of routes to that. We have the one that probably everybody begins to understand now, which is paragraph 84E of the National Planning Policy Framework. And that is the exemption house, the country house that is all singing, all dancing. There have been several on the TV, and that is what I would suggest is probably almost the hardest route in terms of the level of work that you have to do to achieve planning permission.
So let's break this down. We're looking at a policy that originates from stately homes. It came into effect many years ago to protect country homes and sort of those stately homes that you see, that you probably go and visit on a Saturday with your family. Is that the sort of thing?
Yeah, that's correct. So the core essence of that policy came from effectively allowing people to create a modern stately home, and the recognition that actually they add value to the rural country, which they clearly do.
Yeah.
And it's a policy which is almost an exception policy. And exception policies are very, the number of exception policies are very small, and they can be very handy in terms of how you can use those policies to develop schemes and things like that, because you're looking at one singular policy in planning documents which normally have hundreds of policies, hundreds of paragraphs. So it's very, very good in that way, and it is a good route if you're prepared to put the level of work in to achieving that that exception to the policy. And the reason it's an exception to the policy is that you have to have such a high bar for achieving planning permission.
Okay, so what quantifies? What do you have to achieve? What are the exceptions?
So in general terms, it must be outstanding architecture.
How do you quantify outstanding architecture?
Good question. So we really take an approach to that, and I think probably what we will do is we will do a whole episode, I suspect, on this, because I think there's a lot to talk about. And I think what we ought to do really is set out in that episode the processes to do it. But in essence, to achieve a paragraph 84 house, you have to demonstrate to the local authority that you have achieved outstanding architecture, and that's normally done through design review panels.
What is a design review panel?
So a design review panel is an independent peer-reviewed panel that reviews the whole scheme, and in essence what they will do is they will either say yes, it is outstanding, or no, it's not outstanding.
Okay. And to be clear, outstanding architecture isn't your bog standard home. If you already have a perception in mind, it's quite difficult to make that happen on your site. If you are looking at making a sort of delivering a paragraph 84 house, there are some sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, so
There's some parameters you have to work around. So you're not going to have exactly what you want necessarily. It's going to have to fit into that site, be sort of work in the context of that site, and in order to be outstanding, it's going to have to look a certain way.
Yes and no. So all good design is contextual. And when I say contextual, I mean it's related to the site. It's related to the site itself. It's related to the site surroundings. You must, as part of the design process, you must demonstrate that, one, you've evaluated that, and two, you've responded to that. We need to separate in our minds the difference between good design and what is personal taste. And good design is a process, it's a procedure. It's not whether you like the end result or not. So we as professionals, I mean, I've designed anything from a grade 1 listed church all the way through to country houses. They're vastly different, but professionally the same process happens in terms of how you evaluate a site. And I think we need to separate that. But I think what we'll do is we'll quantify that a little bit more for people so that they understand that. I think when we do an episode on paragraph 83, 84 houses.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And then, so moving on, we've got the Grand Designs paragraph 84 homes that we've covered there. What else can you achieve if you haven't got the budget to go wild and do all of these design review panels and achieve exactly what you're looking to achieve in the open countryside? Because those homes have to be isolated, don't they? So that would suggest that you have no neighbors around you, that it is physically isolated from anything else.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
there's court rulings around that.
So the Braintree ruling demonstrates how the court sees isolation, and isolation is a literal isolation, not an isolation from services. So there's two different things in planning policy terms, and generally the national guidance and the local plan says that you should avoid isolated houses, and that's absolutely true. You should avoid isolated houses unless they are a paragraph 84E house or they are an existing building which is being converted. I would suggest that most of the sites that people make inquiries with us on are actually not isolated sites at all. They are outside settlement boundaries, and I think people very often immediately think you have to go straight down the paragraph 84E route. That's not at all true. There are other elements that allow you to develop outside settlement boundaries. And the reason I say that is that settlement boundaries are not a determinative in terms of whether you would achieve planning permission or not. Often there's a suggestion that that is true. It is not true. And that is not how both national planning policy or local plan policy is written. That it's all to do with what is called the planning balance, and the planning balance is quite complicated, but in essence it's about weighing up the positives and negatives of a scheme, and if the positives outweigh the negatives, then the thought process is that that should be approved. There are other mechanisms available to us in the National Planning Policy Framework, for instance paragraph 139, which relate to good design and sustainable innovation and those sorts of things, which allow us to provide significant weight in the planning balance on the positive side of a scheme. So should there be any policy tension with spatial strategies are relating to settlement boundaries, then we can very often overcome those by doing other elements for a singular dwelling.
Yeah, so it would still have to be of high quality. And to be honest, all design should be of high quality. All homes, everybody deserves a home that is of high quality and a high standard, which is essentially what paragraph 139 is looking to achieve. It's applicable to every house, every project put forward.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely has to comply with paragraph 139.
Yeah.
It's working out how it can be used to our advantage, especially if you were looking at a plot on the edge of a settlement boundary. It's not isolated. There's a country lane, there's houses down there, and you want to add to those homes. Somebody's got a field that they're looking to sell. It's next to their house, and you would like to put a house on there. That's not isolated. You're not going to get a paragraph 84, but you could get a paragraph 139 on there. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's correct. And in essence, the closer a site is to the settlement boundary, so for instance, if a site is directly adjacent to the settlement boundary and you are intending to build it for yourself as a self-build, then there are other mechanisms as well as paragraph 139 that we can use to add weight in that planning balance. So it's one of those things where you have to look at it on a site-by-site basis, and come up with an approach on a site-by-site basis. But actually, very often it ends up being a combination of a multitude of approaches to a planning strategy.
Okay, what do we mean by self-build? Does that mean you have to build it yourself?
No. So in 2016, the government introduced the Self-Build and Custom House Building Act. And since then, they've been required to have a register of people who would like to self-build in the district.
So this is every council has to have a register.
Every council, if you look on most councils' websites, they have a web page on there which deals with the Self-Build Act and how you can register on their register. Some of them have fees that you have to pay the council for administering those. And what this does is it means that the council has to take into account the register and the amount of need that's derived from the register,
Demonstrated by it, yeah.
and apply that to their decision making in delivering enough self-build plots to deal with that. And they have a 3-year timescale to do that. Now, you know that our experience of that is that virtually every district we've ever worked with does not fully understand their self-build obligations and is not fully complying with delivering sufficient units. So when a council doesn't provide sufficient units, then it opens the door for us to start to look at exploring, okay, well, where could we go and come up with our own solutions to the council's problem, which it very often ends up being extensions to settlements with self-build plots, and often very much clients coming up with their own plots and us using the self-build deficit argument as part of the planning balance. So again, something else that adds to the positive weight of those projects.
And to be clear, a self-build project does not mean you having to build that project yourself. It means you need to have significant input in commissioning that home. So that's in the design. This home will be designed for you, bespokely for you. You can still pay a builder to build that house. You can still pay an architect to design that home. It's all about making sure that you are part of that journey, really, and that it's for you, self-built for you. The other part of that act is custom build, which then means that somebody else is providing the plot, already has planning permission on that plot, but you are still involved in the design of that home. You still have significant input in how that home looks. So that could be the floor plans, the materials used to create that home. It can't be just choosing the tiles in your kitchen and the colour of the brick. It has to be more than that. But as long as you're demonstrating that you are part of that process, and often there will be a legal agreement signed up against that called a unilateral undertaking or a Section 106, which allows you to ensure legally that home is being built for you, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So in essence, the home must be built for you singularly or you as a family.
Yes.
And it must be deliberately designed and developed for that. The process of that, you don't have to do any of that yourself. You can just employ the right people in the right way, as you probably would if you were doing an extension to your house or something like that.
Yeah, we often find that people are actually self-builders that we've dealt with. Quite a few of them are often quite eager to be part of that process and be quite hands-on.
Absolutely.
I know certainly we would want to be moving forward, but you don't have to be. And it quite often happens that self-build is something that you are able to achieve later on in life when you're maybe not physically capable of building a home yourself. So knowing that you don't have to actually be hands-on to achieve that self-build is quite an important thing to point out, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've covered so far, we've covered your paragraph 84s, we've touched on paragraph 139, conversions of existing buildings. One thing left that we haven't spoken about yet would be a rural exception site. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Okay, so rural exception sites are traditionally affordable housing, types of affordable housing. and they are sites which are directly adjacent to the settlement boundary. And again, it's one of these kind of exception rules, which is normally written within local plan policy, which allows some flexibility around how you can deliver housing. So very often in this country, we do struggle to deliver affordable housing in the right way. And that affordable housing can be a multitude of different tenures, from rented all the way through to shared ownership, those types of things. And they're designed deliberately to be fairly modest sites, available on any settlement at all. And the idea behind them is to allow local people, if they want to stay in villages, to be able to either rent or buy and stay in that village.
Yeah, it's quite often the case that people are outpriced of the market, especially young people in today's world trying to get on that housing ladder. They're having to move out of the towns, the villages, the areas that they grew up in, um, and that needs to be addressed. So if there's mechanisms that the council can, or levers they can pull to make that happen, then that's absolutely something they should be looking at, and quite often do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what that policy is designed to do, really.
Yeah. One other thing we've not spoken about is co-housing as well, sort of community-led homes. They they're quite often built on the edges of settlements and things like that as well, and that's when a group of people come together to build their own homes together in a community.
Yeah, so that ends up being kind of an amalgamation of policy. So it's kind of half rural exception, half
Self-built.
self-build,
Yeah.
deficit argument. So again, it becomes one of those schemes whereby actually you're looking at what positives that those schemes bring, and you're weighing those against the potential harms of that being outside of a settlement boundary.
And I think that's an important one to mention as well, because that trend is really sort of coming to fruition. We're seeing lots of great examples of that. There's one recently, I forget what it's called. I think it's possibly Bristol Way, where a group of single mums have clubbed together and they've built their family homes
Hmm.
together, masonettes, and they look absolutely fantastic. And they are so proud of their achievement, and rightly so. They have managed to fundraise, they've managed to find the right experts to help them along the way, and it's fantastic. There's another one in Leeds called Charco. That's an incredible site as well. I've had the pleasure of visiting there myself, and the community is absolutely fantastic. It's something that is really sort of coming to fruition in the UK, and I'm really pleased to see it.
I think what you find with these types of schemes is that when it's for you and it's for your family, people are so much more invested in the scheme in the first instance and then maintaining that scheme afterwards. And I think that is an enormous positive over what I would consider to be normal market housing on housing estates.
Absolutely. I think one thing with rural living, generally the people we see wanting to live in the countryside are living there because they want to, not because they're forced to. It's generally because they don't want to be on a big housing estate. They don't want to be in the center of town. They long for that peace. They long for those views that aren't necessarily always achievable on a housing development. And I think the passion our clients certainly have for what they're looking to achieve is huge and really helps drive them on that journey. Because building a home in the countryside is a journey. It's not for the faint of heart. Planning challenges will always be there. Finding the right people and the people with experience, people that you connect with that will help you along that journey is definitely important. Finding people that can advise you well, have experience in that field, would definitely be recommended.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very specialist, and I think you're exactly right. I think finding the right people that suit you, that you connect with, is almost the most important part of that process.
Definitely, and that's maybe something we'll explore in a future episode. So keep on listening, keep on coming back to find out what we're talking about next time. Thank you for listening to the first ever episode of The Architecture of Rural Living.